Happy Arvo. Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing? What can the U.S. learn from Australia's gun reforms? I don't know. Probably nothing. Has the U.S. learned anything in like 30 years when it comes to that? Is the U.S. capable of learning? That's an actual question. By a small and up-and-coming channel called CNN. Go check them out. This video has a lot of dislikes, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if the Aussies are mad or the Americans. But we're going to find out. It's certainly an interesting question. What can the U.S. learn? Good question.
Well, now to America's other pandemic, and that would be the never-ending cycle of gun violence. There have been 100...
Cycle. I always think that's an interesting term, cycle of gun violence, because that is kind of how it works. At least that's how it works. There's really two different kinds of shootings, and it's like ones that are just perpetually in revenge, like gang type stuff. And then there's the others that are more so thought of in America, which is like at schools and stuff. I don't know if you call that a cycle, but it's definitely a pattern.
157 mass shootings in the U.S. just this year.
How do you, it's kind of funny, you get different numbers for that. Because what is the definition of a mass shooting? What exactly is the definition? 157? Because usually there's like, it seems like there's one really bad one every like 2 months, 2 to 6 months. So it's weird when you hear 157. Most of them don't even make the news because I guess it's just, I don't know.
Just in 2021. And with congressional action on gun reform seemingly at a standstill, some Americans are asking if other countries can serve as an example. Next week marks 25 years since Australia's Port Arthur massacre, a mass shooting that killed 35 people. Afterwards, automatic and semi-automatic rifles were banned in Australia. They enacted a national registry and a 28-day waiting period for all gun purchases. And 653,000 firearms were taken out of circulation in a national buyback program.
Man, I like I think I like the 28-day waiting period. That's interesting because then that prevents like impulsive decisions to go do something really bad, like purchase it and do something bad. It doesn't do a whole lot, but at least it can prevent that, like, I'm gonna go buy it and do something really bad. Gun registry, my God, that would be such a, I don't think that could happen here in America. At least not anytime soon. The buyback is interesting. Sometimes there are buybacks here in America, like small ones. It's interesting because you could never go to Americans' houses and just take the guns because that would cause a civil war. But a buyback is an interesting thing.
Gun deaths in the country plummeted, and today mass shootings there are nearly non-existent.
But I will say, I do know, because I've watched a couple other videos on this subject. I'm somewhat of a expert. No, nobody would call me that. But that the guns in circulation, if you look at that graph, it went like this, like down, but now it's back up where it was, which I don't know what that means. Maybe it's, I don't know what the implications of that is. But I'm pretty sure that's the case, right? Like the guns in circulation went way down during the buyback, but now it's back up. Anyway.
Compare that to America, the gun capital of the world.
I think there is more to it. She was skipping out, so I decided to pause it again because I do have more thoughts. I think there's like a cultural thing here in America. And also most of the deaths are like gang-related stuff, and I think that's not nearly as big a problem in Australia, which is kind of a separate type of issue to figure out how to deal with. You know what I mean?
Where last year there were nearly 12 gun deaths per 100,000 people.
That's insane.
More than 14 times that of Australia. But there are some
14
differences,
times.
of course. Australia doesn't have a right to bear arms in their constitution. They also don't have a powerful gun lobby like the NRA. Still,
You know what else I'm thinking? Like, there aren't any guns being smuggled across the border into Australia like there may or may not be here in America. I mean, I guess that's not really necessary here in America. Yeah. Maybe that's not necessary. That would explain more of America's drug problems, but maybe not guns.
could Australia's model have some lessons for the United States? Joining me now to discuss is
Probably.
former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd. He is now president of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Prime Minister Rudd, thank you for coming on the show to discuss this. Obviously, as I pointed out, there are some key reasons Australia's reforms can't be replicated exactly here in the U.S. The main one being, of course, the Constitution here. Australia doesn't have a right to bear arms. We do. But what do you believe is transferable from what Australia went through to what we're experiencing in the U.S.?
Well, I think there's two or three commonalities between the United States experience and Australia. And having lived in America the last 5 or 6 years, I fully understand the differences, including the Second Amendment. But here are two or three common factors. One, we Australians are freedom-loving people. And people have had the right to own firearms for a long, long period of time in our history. And because Australia is a rural country with large open spaces like in America, it's kind of been part of our...
Interesting he said like in America, but because I just don't think of America being like that, but it is true. Like Central North America and like Central West, especially Central West America, pretty sparse. I've never really thought about that being a similarity to Australia, where it's really sparse in the middle. But it kind of is.
upbringing to have firearms on farms, for example. I grew up on a farm in rural Queensland where...
But to be honest, those aren't the people causing the problem here in America.
My father had a shotgun, which he used to suppress feral animals. So there is that similarity. The second thing I think is this. All of us, as Americans today and as Australians today, are horrified by the spectre of mass shootings. And when we saw this in Australia, big time, 25 years ago, with a mass shooting at a place called Port Arthur.
Isn't it disturbing how that became like, it seems like it became a trend, like a trendy thing, like in the last 25 years, you know? Like after, especially here in America, it just feels like after Columbine. My God, what a horrible trend. There were mass shootings before Columbine, though, of course. It just wasn't as common, especially at a school.
In Tasmania. The then Conservative Prime Minister of Australia, my predecessor in office, he initiated this National Firearms Agreement, which had bipartisan support from both the centre-right and the centre-left. And thirdly, the results are kind of in. 25 years later, the numbers are like this. In the previous quarter of a century, we had 14 mass shootings, one every year or two. In the last 25 years, since the National Firearms Agreement, we've had one, a family violence event involving 6 members. And secondly, in the overall firearms homicide rate.
See, now that's kind of what I mean is I wonder what the definition he's using versus what she's using. Because if they had one and we had in the last, like, whatever he said, 10 years, and we had 146 in the last year, like, holy shit.
Rate and suicide rate, it's cut in half as well. That is, aside from mass shootings. So I think the writing or the report card is in. It does work. And frankly, there is no great reaction and demand from gun owners for any more liberal laws. It's working, frankly, just fine.
I have so many questions for you from what you just said. One is gun rights activists in the U.S. are concerned. One of their big concerns with more laws on guns would be it becomes a slippery slope that will then lead to them not being able, legal citizens being able to get their guns that they feel like they have, they do have the right to have under the Constitution.
Can you repeat that?
They're concerned that it will infringe upon their Second Amendment rights. What do you see?
I mean, that is the catch, huh? Like that is the difficult thing here in America is that obviously when the constitutional amendment, I mean, it's relatively straightforward. I mean, it does have some caveats in it about like a well-regulated militia and stuff, but it's pretty straightforward. And so it's hard to argue that putting more restrictions wouldn't like impede or potentially impede upon that constitutional right. Maybe we need to rewrite the amendment.
Say to the slippery slope argument?
I don't think it's well
But then again, rewriting an amendment should not be an easy thing. You know what I mean? Like you definitely don't want a bunch of crooked politicians to just be able to go in there and rewrite any constitutional amendment. Like on that hand, it's true. Like it should not be easy to do that.
founded if the laws are robust. You see, under the US Constitution, the right to bear arms as part of an organized militia. And remember, this was framed in the days of the period immediately
Well regulated,
following
not organized.
the Revolutionary War against the British, and the concern that the British would come back and you'd need an organized militia again to defend the Republic against the British. By the way, back in the 1780s and 90s, I would have utterly sympathized with that posture towards the British. Last time I looked, the likelihood of the British coming back and suppressing the American Revolution are fairly remote. So that's actually the black and white letter of the law context of where we saw the First Amendment framed. But
Almost.
the second point is probably more important, which is the right to bear arms is one thing, but it doesn't mean you have the right to bear any form of arms. If you take it literally, does that mean the right to bear arms says that you should be able to have your own
An
field
RPG.
howitzer in the backyard? That you should have the ability to have an anti-tank weapon?
The crazy thing is, I mean, if you look up some YouTube channels, people do. I mean, you do need to get a lot more certifications. That is not just like a right here in America to own a machine gun, for example. But some Americans do. You have to get a lot of certifications and stuff.
To run your own drones, which are armed? Of course not. So having a single-action shotgun is one thing. Having a semi-automatic or fully automatic weapon which can kill dozens of...
And there's a big distinction between semi and full. At least there's a distinction. With stuff like bump stocks, that distinction becomes less meaningful.
people in seconds, that's something else. So
Right.
you can have the right to bear arms if it's single action. The judgment in this country, Australia, is it doesn't entitle you to bear any category of arms, hence the ban on semi-automatic weapons in this country.
And we already have. I mean, one of the big questions is there's more guns than people in this country. I know in Australia there was the gun buyback. So, you know, there is that big question. But I wonder, as someone who
I don't know if the U.S. can afford to buy them back. 300 million guns. I'm gonna have to print a lot of money.
was a world leader, as you see these mass shootings, again, nearly 150 just this year in America, as you see that play out, what is your reaction? What are you thinking? What do you think the world is thinking as they watch this play out in this country?
I think what the world is thinking is that it's time for America to act. Look, I've lived among you in the United States the last 5 or 6 years. I'm just back here temporarily in Australia at the moment. And I feel it as someone who lives and works in New York, that there is a feeling of anxiety that there could be a mass shooting today, tomorrow.
The ironic thing is, sometimes that feeling, because I know what he means, and sometimes that feeling makes you feel like, well, I need to be armed. Because if anyone else here could be, well, I guess I need to be too. So it's almost like, I don't know, counterintuitive in that way.
Will the next one unfold on a school campus or a university campus or in a shopping centre mall? I mean, the terrible history of these things. And that's why, frankly, I applaud the leadership of President Biden in taking this first major step towards national firearms legislation and regulation, which he has foreshadowed. I know what the political reaction will be. I know that
Nothing ever comes of it. This was 2 years ago, and I don't even know what he's talking about. I don't know of any new gun reforms.
A whole bunch of states will say it impinges on their constitutional rights and the usual list of arguments. But I think if you polled average Americans, they want something done to reduce the risk of mass shootings.
Right. And they just want solutions. They want solutions. All right. Former Australian
Especially like common sense things, you know,
Prime Minister Kevin
with background checks and stuff.
Rudd, thank you for coming on and sharing that perspective and interesting discussion with you about this.
Well, okay, after watching it, I think that the Americans are the ones disliking it. I'm afraid to read some comments. I love how people try to tell another country what they should be doing while not having the underlying problems that that country has. The guy quite literally made the point on why it is a slippery slope. A gun registration will lead to confiscation. Oh boy. Man, this is a fiery topic here in America. And there's so many people that own guns illegally. And those people are responsible for a huge amount of the homicides. Man, what a difficult problem to actually solve. Oh boy. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you to CNN for that news report. And for the record, I disagree with this top comment. I love how people try to tell another country what they should be doing. I kind of disagree. It's like, I mean, I like to hear the opinions of people. I don't care what country you're from. And especially if you look at other countries and see what worked and stuff. That makes sense. Anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for watching.